Okay, so it is official. We will get the Winter's Rift back into the League of Legends game. Okay, so we finally won in this matter. Well, it has been a long time, you know. I missed the map itself, so it's good to have the Winter's Rift. We will also get Zahan being released. A lot of people found the champion controversial. Um, Initially, it was supposedly a support, but Riot eventually shifted the direction of the champion, and a lot of people like it, a lot of people dislike it. It is also a move because of the arcane stuff, as you know. So, yeah, you can watch the abilities run down and Champion Spotlight anywhere, as Eternals will release in the next patch. Also, be aware of the linking penalties across accounts, which means you have to be extra careful. Riot is taking a stronger stance in punishing players, in punishing their player base. We've seen it a lot through X or Twitter, and we have seen it a lot with these changes that they've been doing. So, in case you have a linked account or in case you get punished in one of those accounts, expect to be punished in every single account. So be very careful and, you know, just be a normal human being in the game, as per se. Champions, Aatrox will be receiving a buff in the jungle, so we will see a lot of Aatrox in the jungle for the next patch. This is a huge buff because his monster damage cap is being increased based on level. Initially, it won't be felt too much, but his Q monster damage, bonus monster damage, is going to be up by 40 in a flat amount right off the bat. Of course, it's still multiplied by other effects like sweet spots and multicasts. So, huge buff for Aatrox jungle, and a lot more champions you will see will be buffed for jungle purposes. Ahri, mostly a placebo buff. I would say that this buff is mostly for low elo Ahri players because if you're playing Ahri in high elo, you mostly want to max E second for the CC duration, so this buff won't be necessarily too felt. I would say this is maximum of 1% buff, mostly for low elo Ahris, because low elo Ahris tend to max W second still. So I would say it's quite irrelevant for the higher elo you get, the less win rate you will feel, and the lower elo you are, then you will feel a bigger difference because of this specific shenanigan. Ambessa plus 25 monster damage, one more of those changes. Ashe attack speed is going down. Basically, she has been recently buffed and dominating a bit in the meta. Her win rate got increased, so they're trying to punish Ashe a bit. Same goes for Caitlyn actually. Her champion damage increase is going down in total AD and also in non-champion damage increase, which means it goes into a flat amount of 110% total AD instead of actually going up into 120%. Of course, this hurts Caitlyn overall. And the crit formula isn't changed, of course. Monster damage for Cho'Gath is also going up, which means instead of having a flat amount of 20, it goes up to hundreds, and then 30% AP still on the scaling, and it doesn't have up to 200 based on target max HP. So it's a flat amount now, and yeah, they want to make it, Cho'Gath jungle to come up as well. Cho'Gath, Aatrox, and Ambessa, a lot of champions will show up, even Fizz, for example. Bonus attack damage for maximum health will be increased because Mundo was dealing pretty much no damage, and Riot wanted to fix that because they back-to-back nerfed the champion when it came to its damage. He lost a lot of win rate, and they fixed a bug as well where his maximum damage at 30% maximum was sitting at 30% missing HP instead of 70%, which was obviously a nerf as well. Fizz base armor is going up by 4, which is good for the clear health of Fizz because they want to buff him in the jungle, and also good for mid lane in case you're playing it to assassins, of course. And now his passive is having more damage. His W also deals a lot more damage, and the cooldown on his ultimate to try to compensate and not be an overbuff. They want to make his ult to have more cooldown and less repetition, less utilization per se, because Jungle Fizz, once he reaches 6, they want to make him harder to repeat ganks instead of doing a full clear and ganking again with ult or skipping camps and utilizing an ult. They want to still make sure that Fizz cannot snowball as much, and mid lane Fizz will be nerfed in this regard, but he gets +4 armor versus AB champions. Regular Fizz will be nerfed unless you want to do a jungle camp in the mid game. But yeah, overall mid lane Fizz is nerfed, and unless you're playing versus an ADD champion, and in case you're playing jungle, then it's of course a huge buff. Jayce bonus monster damage is being increased both in the melee and ranged form, so one more champion being buffed in the jungle. Doesn't really make much sense to see Jayce though, so I wouldn't expect to see much Jayce. Jhin gets 2 more AD, and of course, because of the way he functions, he gets a lot more value out of this buff in comparison to other AD champions. Movement speed, he gets plus plus 4, so instead of being +4 flat, it's 0.4 on top. And of course, because it's Jhin, they want to give it a logical value. They should do the same actually for the W itself. Gets 10 more damage here and every single level, so yeah, overall a nice Jhin buff, I would say. Jinx maximum damage is decreased on our ultimate. Bonus AD is also decreased, so basically a lethality Jinx nerf. Almost no one was doing it nowadays, so it's overall a nerf, but mostly for those type of builds in case you would go for the lethality Jinx. Base armor on Xayah goes down by 2. Cooldown goes up a bit, so Xayah will be a bit more exposed, especially because she's a champion that has a really small range unless you are playing for artillery Xayah with W max and the AP build. Otherwise, you get to be more vulnerable, and this is a really good nerf because Xayah would be an extremely obnoxious champion to play against because she's extremely healthy when doing trades, and it would be quite hard to chunk her HP bar down during the laning phase. So it's a nice way to create a gap of vulnerability for you to be able to punish her more, or for you to get easily punished or even more punished now. Hwei is having a big nerf, one of the biggest nerfs in the patch. His hit damage is going down in a flat amount. Damage over time on his QE, which is the Fissure, the Molten Fissure. The hit damage is down. The damage over time is also down. The AP ratio is up, but it doesn't really matter. They want to try to compensate in the AP ratio, but what matters is the breakpoint of your wave clear in early stages. It will be heavily nerfed because he's losing a huge amount, and to compensate this value, you have to build a lot of AP, So if I'm not mistaken, it's over 700 AP, and what really matters is the initial stages, so he loses a lot of wave clear breakpoints in the laning phase for sure. And the hit damage is also lowered, so it's a huge nerf for Hwei in the early game. Malphite monster modifier is now amplified by double on his W, so one more champion to keep in mind. It can be a really good counter pick, and this clear speed will be quite quick because of this change. Mel, her passive is once again being buffed, and despite her root duration being heavily nerfed, this is a huge quality of life, and I think her passive is really OP now. She had really small amounts, small values, and now that she has this value, even though she loses her root duration in her snare, in her root, it's still a big buff. So it's sort of an adjustment, but I would consider this for sure a buff because this amount is huge. She gets 6% AP more on top of the later stages flat amount of damage based on level being increased the later you go into the game as well. Misfortune plus 5% total AD. Sure, I think this buff doesn't really make much sense because her ultimate already deals a decent amount of damage. I think they should look to buff other base stats of Misfortune so that she could appear more often. I don't think her bullet time is the reason why you would pick her more often. Of course, it's a damage buff, but I would say that her base stats in the early stages would make MF more appealing to be picked in this meta. Of course, it's still a buff, so yeah, keep this in mind. Ornn is one of the champions that they want to buff in the jungle, so monster damage also being increased. Keep in mind, Ornn can bind the jungle. It doesn't necessarily need to recall, so he can always stay in the map if he is healthy enough for it. Rek'Sai is getting nerfed, I would say. Fury that she gains is now from 5 into 4, so it's a 4% nerf, and max HP gained is less. Her sustain would be ridiculous. She will still be fine into some certain scenarios. Complete NPC champion to be played in top side. So from what we've seen at Worlds, yeah, despite being a nerf, I would say it's still not enough. It's still a sizable change in this Fury, but still, it's still an NPC champion in case you play versus certain champions to be able to counter and just neutralize the pressure. Riven, one of the biggest changes as well. She gets 50 flat bonus damage on her passive. Yeah, I would say that she will get either outfixed or nerfed right away because this is a completely ridiculous orientation. Riven is one of the strongest champions, not only in top lane, and now that she shows up in the jungle as a flexible pick, yeah, it will be quite ridiculous. Sion also getting more monster moth damage. Skarner AD growth going up by 1 flat, which is huge, and cooldown is also being increased once you max it into 1 second, and you deal 1% more max HP damage with your Q. So huge buff for Skarner, and he has been receiving a lot of changes and a big shift when it comes to his own identity. Swain, never move, is being increased in his damage. Mana also going down a bit. Okay, sure, it's a small buff for Swain. Doesn't really change much. AD growth on Tristana goes up by 0.4. Not a huge buff, but it helps Tristana a bit. Especially because she wants to reach mid and late game stages in a healthy manner. So, helps a bit. Vladimir, HP, he loses 7. This doesn't really change anything. And -3 armor. Basically, Vladimir will lose 1% win rate at best. At worst, I would say. 1% less win rates. Volibear, base AD, they want to give +3. Basically, they felt like the nerf was too much. So they want to compensate a bit more. Xayah gets 5% more damage in her passive. In her feathers, I think this is a really good change for Xayah when it comes to her damage and into certain compositions, where she can receive and deal damage versus low range. Really good, of course. And this doesn't make Xayah shift into lethality build at all because, yeah, as you can see, it's an overall buff, which means it's a good quality of life, which will give Xayah a reliable increase of win rate, especially when Xayah is usually picked as a counter pick when she's playing into low range type of compositions. Zeri gets a lot more movement speed per stack, but I don't think it's as huge as some people were making it seem like it is. Even though you get double the movement speed, if you get a really long team fight where you can use it fully, sure, this is a huge buff, but most fights don't really take too long, so I would say the movement speed, yes, it can be felt a bit, and she might have a win rate increase, but I wouldn't say it's a huge increase because the fights will be decided in the first 5 to 6 seconds either way. So not a big amount of time or a reliable amount of time that will make this buff be felt too much overall. Sunfire Aegis will also have monster damage mod increased, and then ARAM changes, so let's do a really quick TLDR of the patch. So Winter's Rift is back. Xayah will be released. Be careful with your other accounts in case you get punished, because you will get punished overall. Every single account will be taking into accountability. A lot of jungle changes. Aatrox will be fine in the jungle. Ahri, it's mostly a placebo change. Probably 1% win rate buff for low elo Ahris. Probably less for higher elo Ahris because you want to max E second when you're higher elo supposedly, and lower elo Ahris still max W second. Ambessa also receiving a small buff for jungle. Ashe dropping a bit of win rates in her attack speed. Also the same goes to Caitlyn when it comes to her damage in her passive headshot. Cho'Gath gets some damage in his E. Dr. Mundo gets some damage back, and also they fixed the bug. Fizz will be overall a nerf for mid lane unless you're playing versus assassins in the mid lane or AD champions because of the armor buff. But Fizz jungle will be heavily buffed in this matter, and they try to compensate it and adjust by giving more cooldown to his ultimates to not be able to cycle as much as he did before in the mid lane. Jayce, even though I don't feel like he will appear, yeah, he's also being buffed in the jungle by 50 flat bonus damage on his melee and ranged form. Jhin, quite reliable buff, I would say, especially because of this +2 AD, because in Jhin it functions in a different way. Also gets more movement speed and damage on his W, so overall a nice buff for Jhin, I would say, for early game stages. Jinx lethality build gets nerfed. Most Jinxes don't really play with the lethality iteration, but still overall, this damage will be felt as a nerf. Kai'Sa will be more vulnerable, excuse me, because she has a low range unless you play artillery Kai'Sa in the initial traits. By having 2 less armor and more cooldown on her ultimate, then yeah, she will decrease probably 1% win rate overall. Hwei, this is more than, I would say, 2 to 3% win rate drop. It's a huge nerf for Hwei in his wave clear breakpoint, so yeah, this hurts a lot, and I think it's a 2% minimum win rates drop in Hwei, at the very least. Malphite gets double the damage in his W in monster damage clear. Mel, I would say it's a buff because her passive is really OP now. Gets 6% more AP, more scaling when it comes to flat amounts, even though she loses root duration. So yeah, less root duration, but a lot more passive damage per spell. It's huge buff for Mel, for sure. Most likely she will have to be nerfed because of this. Misfortune, I think she should be buffed when it comes to her base stats. I don't really like the fact that she gets her ultimate buffed. Doesn't really make much sense when the ultimate is in a healthy position. Ornn jungle is a possibility as well. Rek'Sai will still be fine into NPC type of matchups, but she gets a bit of a nerf when it comes to her sustain. Riven will be probably outfixed or nerfed in the upcoming patch. Sion gets his monster mod increased. Skarner Q will be buffed when it comes to his damage. I think Skarner will be really good in a really good spot when it comes to his Q spam ability. Swain doesn't really change, it's mostly a placebo change. Tristana won't be felt too much, but mid-late game breakpoints will be a lot healthier in comparison. Vladimir, the armor change is the most felt. The HP one is not really felt. This is at best or at worst 1% drop in win rate. Plus 3 AD on Volibear, this is 1% win rate for Volley. Try to compensate for the previous nerfs that he has received. Xayah, really good change to try to give her more damage overall. Now, if you do Essence Reaver and Navori, you won't feel this as much. You have to do Essence Reaver into Infinity Edge or Yuntal into Infinity Edge instead of just doing non-damage or, just mosquito damage build on Xayah. So do the good build on Xayah. You will feel this buff for sure. And Zeri, you won't likely feel this change because most fights will be decided in the first 5 to 6 seconds. So you won't have the time to really stack this in most fights. If in case you get a really extended fight, you will feel this a lot in case you're able to stack your movement speed in a really extended fight, but I would say this will not be the case in most scenarios. And the last change, Sunfire Aegis also has monster damage mod. So this is mostly a jungle change, jungle path change approach that they want to get. Overall, a lot of changes for the champions that might appear in the jungle. Try to make it creative. I would say Hwei gets a huge nerf overall. And yeah, this is the patch. I'm mostly excited to see the winter map coming back. So let's see how it lands in the new one. Because I am expecting some hot fixes or some quick nerfs to be landed in the 25.24 right away.